Thank you very much, Namini, for inviting me to be part of this session. It's a great pleasure. I'm sorry I'm not there in Sri Lanka. At the moment, we're in London, where our children and grandchildren are. But I guess modern technology is such that distance is not a barrier. So it's a real privilege to be with all of you today. What I'm going to do initially is to try to explain Sri Lanka's regression. At the time of independence, we were second to Japan on many socioeconomic indicators in Japan. In Japan, we were number 2.
Encourage you to ask questions.
Since then, we have regressed. And what I'm going to try to do is to explain using 2 broad thematic areas, to use those thematic areas to explain why we have gone backwards. Then also to explore subsequently what has been done to address those problems which has constrained our forward movement, and to see whether those are sustainable and whether we are on a path to recovery. So that's broadly at a high level an outline of what I propose to say this evening. So let me start. Let me just get rid of that. Sorry, something. Okay. Let me now start by talking initially. There are 2 thematic areas I said. One is we have had, as a country, repeating bouts of macroeconomic stress, which is why we have had 17 IMF programs. The second broad thematic area is the lack of structural reforms to build a growth model that will give us sustained increases in output, that is economic growth and employment and incomes. We have not been able to build such a growth model, because such a growth model would have to be, for a country of our size and size of market, will have to be a growth model that is based on exports. And if you look around the world, whether a country is as small as Singapore or as large as China, or in between, a country like Vietnam or Thailand or Malaysia, FDI has played a very important role in those countries achieving export transformation, which has, it says signal drop. Is there a problem? Namini, is there a problem? I see a...
No,
Hello?
doctor. No, doctor. We can very clearly hear you. Yeah.
Okay, fine. So as I was saying, so we haven't achieved. The second thematic area is the lack of structural reforms and forming a export-led transformation model of growth for the economy. So those are the 2 broad areas that I want to talk about, and then to address what has been done to address those problems. So the first theme is, of course, these repeating bouts of macroeconomic stress. Let me talk about the causes and then the consequences. So let's start with the definition. What do I mean by macroeconomic stress? When you have macroeconomic stress, you have high inflation. And when you have high inflation, interest rates increase, because unless your interest rate, the nominal interest rate, is not higher than inflation, your money tomorrow is going to be worth less than it is today. So people will not save. Everybody will spend, the money will go into imports, the balance of payments will get into trouble, and more demand and in relation to supply will create even more price pressure, and you get into a downward spiral in terms of inflation and balance of payments pressure. So high inflation, high interest rates, high nominal interest rates. So that is one aspect of macroeconomic stress. Then the other aspect of macroeconomic stress is balance of payments pressure, particularly the current account of the balance of payments. And there, once you have the balance of payments problem begins to increase, you begin to also get pressure on the currency and for the currency to depreciate. So this is what is the definition of macroeconomic stress is. One is high inflation. Two is pressure on the balance of payments. And as a result of that, you tend to get high inflation and high volatility in the exchange rate, which of course create instability and a lack of confidence and make it difficult to have sustained growth and development. So that is the definition of macroeconomic stress. And we have had repeating bouts of this macroeconomic stress from the time of independence when we were, as I said, second to Japan. Okay, so what is the reason for this repeating bouts of macroeconomic stress? The primary reason, the underlying reason, is the government's budgetary operations. Basically, we have lived beyond our means as a country, and the government has run large budget deficits, and it hasn't had a primary surplus in its budget. It has had it only 5 times since independence. Now, what do I mean by a primary surplus? A primary surplus is where total revenue covers total expenditure in any given year without taking into account interest payments. So what that means is you're meeting all your current year's expenditure out of current year's revenue. And so you do not have to borrow. You do not have to add to your debt stock to be able to meet all your expenditures. So that is the primary surplus that I'm talking about. And we haven't had a primary surplus. So every year we have been borrowing, adding to our borrowing. So that is also an underlying problem in terms of our macroeconomic characteristics. In fact, this living beyond our means was actually commented upon by Professor Joan Robinson, who came to Sri Lanka in 1959. Mr. Bandaranaike called her in. She was actually a left-leaning economist, a very strong Keynesian, one of the earliest exports on the People's Republic of China. So she was not a neoliberal by any stretch of the imagination, but she came and she said, you Ceylonese, we were Ceylon then, you Ceylonese have eaten the fruit before you planted the tree, i.e. we were spending before we were able to earn to cover that expenditure. So that is the underlying primary cause of this macroeconomic stress has been the government's budgetary operations. So we have had really since independence a toxic combination of populist policies, populist politics and policies, in the sense that our politicians have tended to have these various giveaways and have promised people various things when elections come, etc. So it's been a very populist kind of politics that we've had. And for our part, as the people of Sri Lanka, we have tended to have a rather deeply entrenched entitlement culture. So we can't only blame the politicians. We also have wanted, we have had an entitlement culture where we wanted things given to us. So this combination was a toxic combination and fed upon each other and dragged us down by having far too much expenditure in relation to the revenue of the government. And we had this sustained budget deficits. And as I said, we hardly ever achieved a primary surplus to stop ourselves from adding to the debt stock. So when this kind of process has gone on for so long, you get a situation where there is a very high aggregate demand in the system. So each time there is a large budget deficit, the government pumps money into the system, and the money available is too much for the extent of supplies that are available. The balance between the demand in the system and the supply the system is able to generate is thrown out of kilter, and you get this price pressure, right? Too many goods chasing too little money. Sorry, too much money chasing the wrong way around. Too much money chasing too little goods results in prices going up. And that's the inflation that we get from the budget deficit. Then also some of this excess aggregate demand that's pumped into the system by the budget leaks into imports. And that puts pressure on our balance of payments. So that is the kind of the nexus, the channel through which the budget deficit causes inflation and causes balance of payments problems. And when we have balance of payments problems, then that puts pressure on the exchange rate. And it's difficult for us to run a flexible competitive exchange rate because there is a large import component in our basic consumption bundle. In the old days, we used to even import a lot of our rice. We are now largely self-sufficient unless there is some issue. In those days, when we imported a lot of our rice and we had a rice ration, etc., people used to talk about exchange rate depreciation as badata gahana. That, you're hitting the stomach by depreciating the currency. So politically, it has always been very problematic to allow the currency to depreciate. So we used to have an overvalued currency. We should stop this to artificially prop up the currency. And what that did was to make our producers less competitive vis-a-vis foreign producers. Because when your currency is overvalued, your exports are disincentivized, and the exports of other countries become cheaper. And so through the exchange rate, for much of the time, we were subsidizing foreign producers at the expense of domestic producers. So as I said, but the root cause has always been the budget. Then this budget putting in excess demand into the system and causing inflation, causing balance of payment pressure, that leading to high interest rates and depreciating currency. So this is a kind of a cycle that has gone on several times, and which is why we went to the IMF 17 times, as I said. Not only that, this situation was amplified. This situation of excess aggregate demand creating problems for the system, putting pressure on the system, was amplified by the actions of the central bank. Because there was what they call fiscal dominance in the central bank. So the central bank, for one thing, printed money. And how it printed money was it would buy treasury bills, government-issued treasury bills, and give the money to the government to spend. So this is the most egregious, the most damaging form of money printing is for the central bank to participate in the primary auction for treasury bills and give the government money through that. So they bought treasury bills, gave the government money, and the government financed its unsustainable large deficits partly through this central bank's money printing. Another thing the central bank did was it used to artificially keep interest rates low so that the government could borrow more cheaply. But when it kept interest rates low, it also led to unsustainable credit growth. Because then the whole system, there was more borrowing, whether it is the households or whether it's businesses, etc. Everybody borrowed more when interest rates were low. And we saw that even in the last couple of years, where part of the reasons why people are leaving the country is because they took on a lot of borrowing in the last few years, and now they can't sustain it after the tax increases and inflation. So again, this causes, as I said, the central bank's actions causes again an increase in aggregate demand in the system, and it amplifies the negative effects of a large budget deficit by putting more money into the system through these measures and causing inflation to go up and for the balance of payments to deteriorate. So this is the kind of whole nexus of policy making that has brought us into this difficulty. It's a fundamental flaw we've had for many, many years. So now, what is being done to address this? How can we stop the government from consistently running primary deficits in its budget, adding to the debt stock, putting money into the system and causing inflation and causing balance of payments pressure? How can we stop the central bank from compounding the problem through money printing, through keeping interest rates artificially low, through financial repression? all this kind of thing that has been going on for many, many years. How do we stop it? Have we done anything to stop it? And there, I would say, yes, what the government has tried to do is to put in place clear frameworks for budget making, and a clear framework for monetary policy formulation. And both those things, one has been introduced and one is being introduced. So let me say a little bit about that. Now, one, on the budgetary side, there is going to be a public finance management bill, which will be introduced in Parliament very shortly. It is one of the prior actions to get approval of the review of the IMF's extended fund facility, which is ongoing at the moment. We have already got staff level agreement, but before the executive board approves it, we need to pass, at least get this bill into Parliament, the public finance management bill into Parliament. What it does is it puts much more discipline into the budget. For instance, there is now, as you all know, a new tax structure. Our revenue was one of the lowest in the world at 8%, because it was anyway low even before the tax cuts in 2019, but after the tax cuts in 2019, it was one of the lowest in the world. And so we had very, very low revenue, which meant that the central bank had to print large amounts of money and create a lot of inflationary pressure and create a lot of balance of payments pressure by that printed money going into imports. So there is now a new tax structure. There are measures to improve tax administration, that is to collect taxes, and that is being done through various measures, including the use of technology, the Revenue Administration Management Information System. What it does is it allows the IRD to be directly connected to government departments which handle high-value transactions. For instance, the Registrar of Motor Vehicles. So if anybody buys a car, that information is transmitted to the Inland Revenue Department. The Condominium Authority, if anybody buys a condominium, that information is available to the Inland Revenue Department. The Land Registry, anybody buys land, that information is available. So all these government departments which are handling high-value transactions, they will be directly linked to the Inland Revenue Department. And if anybody effects a very large transaction, that information will be available to Inland Revenue, and they can then follow up if people haven't been, filing their tax returns and indicating how the money they earned to be able to conduct those transactions. So that information is now available to Inland Revenue, and they can, I think, collect tax much more effectively. And also, as you know, now everybody over 18 has to have a tax identification number. And you can't undertake various transactions without a tax identification number. There has been a bit of a problem in terms of implementation. It's a bit slow, but I think those are being ironed out. So now we should be able to collect much more revenue than we've done in the past. And one of the big problems which led to this, led to the succession of unsustainable budget deficits, hopefully, is being addressed. Then the next thing is also on the expenditure side, there are a number of measures being taken to improve the control, expenditure control. And here again, on the revenue side, there is the digitalization entailed the Revenue Administration Management Information System. And there is also digitalization on the expenditure side. It's called ITMIS. I can't remember what ITMIS stands for, but it is again a digital platform which enables expenditure to be managed much more effectively. So there are various things being done to make sure that the very poor revenue performance, revenue in 2020, 2021, I think, came down to 8% of GDP. Our expenditure is 20% of GDP. So really, so we're trying now to get revenue up to 15% of GDP by 2026. So that is the target, and these are the measures that are being taken to achieve that and to reduce the size of the budget deficit, and also to make sure that we have a primary surplus in the budget. The target is to get to for the budget primary surplus to be 2.3% of GDP by 2025. So that's a very tough target. We got 0.6% of GDP last year. We have to get it up to 2.3%. And as I said, there have been only, before last year, only 4 years since independence where we had a primary surplus, where we were not adding to the debt through the government's budgetary operations. So I hope now that it's, clear in terms of how this macro stress comes through the government's budgetary operations. So to summarize, government runs large deficits, puts excess aggregate demand into the system. That demand pushes up inflation, and some of it leaks into imports, and that puts balance of payments pressure. So then you end up with higher interest rates, because one of the reasons you have to have higher interest rates is because your nominal interest rate, your interest rate, has to be higher than the rate of inflation, as I said. Otherwise, your money tomorrow is worth less than it is today. So higher interest rates and volatility in the exchange rate. So that's the kind of macroeconomic stress that's always going on. And they're trying to now address that, as I said, one, to the public finance management bill. So that is intended to look after the unsustainable fiscal performance of the government. Then as to the unsustainable monetary policy that we've had, the fiscal dominance in monetary policy, that has been addressed already through the Central Bank Act. What are some of the key things that the Central Bank Act has? It no longer has the Secretary of the Treasury as a member of the governance structure of the central bank. So in the old days, the Secretary of the Treasury was there, and he could influence the work of the monetary board of the central bank. And no longer is that feasible, or at least it's made less likely by the Treasury Secretary being moved out of the governance structure of the central bank, thereby giving the central bank greater independence to conduct its monetary policy. The second thing that was put in place is that there is now a particular framework to formulate monetary policy, and it's called Flexible Inflation Targeting Regime. So that is, there is an inflation target that is initially decided upon by the finance minister, and there is an agreement signed between the finance minister and the governor as to what the inflation target is. And the inflation target today is 5% plus minus 2%. So it can go up to 7%, down to 3%. So between 3 and 7%, but the target the central bank is trying to achieve is 5%. So no longer, do you set monetary policy that is interest rates at the whim of a minister or a governor or somebody else who just sets interest rates. He would set interest rates low so the government can borrow more cheaply, or set interest rates low because some businessmen want low interest rates for their activity. Now it is a data-driven, forward-looking process. So the central bank has upgraded its models. It has upgraded the modeling skills and forecasting skills of its staff. And so you go purely on the data. You look at the data, and the models show you whether inflation is going to go up or down or whatever. And you make sure that through those models, you get a forecast which enables you to achieve this target. And you tweak the interest rate, you increase interest rates if the model shows that inflation is too high, or you reduce interest rates if the target is being met and the economic activity needs a boost, but with lower interest rates. So it's a very much a data-driven technical process, no longer a political process. Just to provide cheap money for the government, or to provide cheap money for supporters of the government in the business community, or whatever of that nature. So, and in addition, the central bank can no longer print money by purchasing treasury bills in the primary auction. The central bank, the government sells treasury bills to raise money to finance its deficit. And as I said, in the old days, when the deficit was large and it was difficult to find the revenue to finance it, the central bank used to step in and purchase these treasury bills through pure money creation, through money printing. It can no longer do so. By law, the central bank can't participate in the primary auctions for the treasury bills and is not able to just print money at will for the government, which is what happened. Billions of rupees of money was printed in the last few years. That can no longer happen. So as I said, now there is a very clear framework for monetary policy formulation, and the central bank has been given the independence to set monetary policy. The minister sets the target. The central bank is given the independence to use its technical expertise to meet that target and not have any political dimensions in monetary policy making. So we have the Public Finance Management Bill putting in place a framework for the budgetary operations. We are having the Central Bank Act, which has already put in place a framework for the central bank, and the framework which gives it more more independence, but also accountability. The target is set by the minister, and if that target is not met, the governor has to explain why the target has not been met to the minister through a letter. Also, the Parliament can call the governor. The Committee on Public Finance can call the governor to explain anything that they are not happy about in terms of monetary policy. And the governor himself can also ask for a hearing from the parliamentary committee through his minister, the finance minister. So there is accountability as well as greater independence for the central bank. Now, these frameworks are very important, right? So we are no longer just doing things through politics and, the minister wanting something or the governor wanting something, whatever else. There are clear frameworks which are kind of technically based to formulate budgetary policy and monetary policy. But, we were putting these in place even in 2015 to 2019, because there was another IMF program, an extended fund facility, which is what we have now. We had another such program in 2015 to 2019. Now, and we made some progress. There was a central bank bill which was drafted. It got to Parliament, but we ran out of parliamentary time in terms of passing it before the election. And also in 2017 and 2018, there was actually a primary surplus. Of the 5 years where we had a primary surplus since 1954, 2017 and 2018, when Mr. Mangala Samaraweera was the finance minister, the government was able to achieve a primary surplus in the budget, because some of these things that I'm talking to you about were beginning to be put in place. There was the new Inland Revenue Act in 2018, and some of the other things that I was talking to you were beginning to be put in place. But then, these frameworks were being put in place, but they were completely reversed, just like that. They got reversed with the change in government in 2019. And, we went backwards. So it's not enough to have these frameworks. They have to be embedded in law. So that is what is happening now. The central bank bill, which was drafted in 2015 to 19, got to Parliament, ran out of parliamentary time, was then set aside, But under the current IMF program, it has been brought back and it has been enacted and it is in place now. And the Public Finance Management Bill, parts of it were put in place, and the government got primary surpluses in 2017 and 2018. But now, it was put aside. And you had these large tax cuts and various things which were completely outside the framework as it was being introduced at that time. So now that framework is being brought back and it is being put into the Central Bank Management, Public Finance Management Bill, which is going to Parliament any day now. So the story is clear. We had all this macroeconomic stress because the bottom of it all was the government budgetary operations. And the instability caused by the government's large budget deficits were compounded by the central bank's monetary policy, which was dominated by the fiscal side. Now, we have got clear frameworks to address those problems, and they are being embedded in law. These frameworks are being embedded in law. Of course, the law can be changed, but you can no longer change it just by a letter from the presidential secretary. That's what happened. There were during that time in 2015, 2019, there was a decision taken by the Monetary Board not to participate in primary auctions. There was a decision also taken to have flexible inflation targeting at the monetary policy regime. So all these things were in place, but just one letter from higher up to the Monetary Board meant that they were told, the Monetary Board was told, you do not have to be bound by the decisions of your predecessors, and all that was reversed, just like that with the letter. You can no longer do that. You have to now change the law, go to Parliament, debate it, and in that time, hopefully now, the population also knows what can happen if you have this kind of macroeconomic stress, and that it's important to have these clear frameworks. Then I think hopefully in the future, it's going to be very difficult to have these kind of policy reversals which have contributed to the problem. I mean, this fiscal problem was being built up for a long time from independence, as I said, but it got triggered to a higher level by certain measures in, the tax cuts in particular, in 2019, at the end of 2019. So that's the macroeconomic stress story. One other aspect of the macroeconomic stress that I should talk to you about is the debt, public debt. How did our debt become so unsustainable? So I'll give you a bit of a historical recount of that. Again, as I said, almost from independence, we've been having a primary deficit in the budget. So every year we are adding on to debt. But for many years, we were okay because the deficit was financed on extremely concessional terms. There were two factors. One is we were a low-income country. And as a low-income country, we were eligible for support on very concessional terms, and terms which are not available for a middle-income country. So when we were a low-income country, 2/3 of our money came from the concessional windows of the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. Now, the terms were 10-year grace period, 20-30-year maturity, and 1% or less of administration charge. Those were the terms on which we were borrowing. 2/3 of the money that we were getting through these 8 programs at that time. And even the rest of the money came from bilateral donors who were giving it to us at 2% or less, and very long maturity. So we were getting very, very cheap money. So we were living beyond our means. And then every year, the World Bank used to organize a donor coordination meeting. Basically, every year, the external financing gap was calculated. How much money did Sri Lanka need from outside to meet its commitments, and to pay its bills, and to do its imports? That amount was then taken to this meeting where all the donors were gathered, coordinated by the World Bank, and each of the donors was to pledge to fill the gap. When they felt that the gap was too high and unsustainable, then we would be forced or requested to go into an IMF program. And the IMF program would then have these austerity measures, which would reduce our external financing gap to an amount which the donors were willing to finance. But those IMF programs were nothing like the current program in terms of pain. So we kind of happily went along. We would essentially live beyond our means, spend beyond what we had, and then go to the aid group meeting and get the money we needed to fill the gap. And when that gap was too big for the aid group, they got us to go to the IMF, and we got a program painful, but nothing like as painful as what we are undergoing now. So, and we got very, very generous treatment from the donors, the traditional donor, that's the Western countries and Japan primarily. Why were they so generous to us? Because we were the second country after Chile in 1977 to liberalize our economy. So of all the countries which went through the inward-looking, controls-oriented economic strategy, we were the second country after Chile to liberalize our economy. And the traditional donors, that is the West plus Japan, wanted to show good development outcomes in a country which had both a liberal polity and a liberal economy. Because Chile at that time was a dictatorship under General Pinochet. It was one of the most severe and authoritarian dictatorships at that time. So it could not be the poster child for anybody. And so the traditional donors got hold of Sri Lanka and made Sri Lanka the poster child and said, this is a country which has a liberal economy and a liberal polity, and they wanted to support us to show good development outcomes. Not only that, though we didn't do that well in terms of infrastructure development and growth, our social indicators were always excellent. We punched way beyond our weight as far as social development was concerned. So the donors had the feeling, okay, these people are using their money to provide health and education for their people, and they're supporting their people. And so they were willing to give their taxpayers' money to us in large quantities on very generous terms. So that is how we managed living beyond our means, having primary deficits in the budget, and going to the aid group and getting the financing we needed, so doing a bit of adjustment through IMF programs, etc. But it was a kind of a relatively easy framework within which we worked. Then, around 2007 onwards, by 2010, we graduated to middle-income country status and lost access to concessional money. All that the concessional money from the World Bank and the ADB, and even from bilateral donors. For instance, we got a 100 million grant to build Victoria Dam from UK. So all that kind of money disappeared. And we had to go to markets. Because as a middle-income country, you're not eligible for this concessional money anymore. And you have to borrow from markets for what you need. So we were living beyond our means, and we didn't change our behavior at all. Even though the money was now on much tougher terms, we didn't change our behavior. We still continue to live beyond our means. But instead of borrowing at 1%, 2%, we were borrowing at 6 and 7%. And the maturity, instead of 30, 40 years, was 5 or 10 years. So the terms got much tougher, but we didn't change our behavior. Not only that, we were also, in a sense, though we had this, we got over how you get from low-income country to middle-income country is to cross an per capita income threshold. I think it's $2,000. Once you go above per capita income of $2,000, you become a low middle-income country, and you lose access to all this very concessional money. Now, we crossed that threshold and became a middle-income country with a deeply flawed growth model. We got over the line, but through a growth which was fueled by the non-tradable sectors. The non-tradable sectors being construction, transport, personal services, even if the public service increased from 600,000 in 2005 to about now 1.1 million, even that is counted as growth. So all that was counted as growth, and we got over the per capita income level through this non-tradable growth. But we funded it. We were increasingly funding that growth in non-tradable sector with more expensive and less stable foreign financing. So clearly there had to be some kind of problem at some point, right? Because what you need to do is to increase your tradables. As you become a middle income country, and you have to go to markets, and you have to have a rating agency, which gives you a rating which enables you to go and borrow in the market. All that is a very different paradigm. And we did not change. We did not change our behavior, though we went to a different paradigm, and a paradigm which required a different type of behavior. We didn't change. We went on the same way, spending too much beyond our means, and borrowing on much tougher terms to finance our imports and the debt repayment, which was increasing all the time. So that is so we were on, in a sense, you could see by about 2015, 2016, it was clear we were on a road to disaster if we didn't change. And in fact, I was involved with the foundation. We wrote some papers and all warning that we could become another Greece. Even when I was in the central bank, I kept saying, look, unless we change, we'll become another Greece. And we didn't change, and we became another Greece. Now, what we need to do basically is to learn lessons from this and make sure, as I said, how does one address this? One is, you can read about it, because we knew this was going wrong. So there some measures started being taken from about 2016, 2017 onwards. And those are actually codified in the, if you can't sleep at night, you can read this. It is called the Sri Lanka Medium-Term Debt Management Strategy. Sri Lanka Medium-Term Debt Management Strategy. You can Google and get it, or go to the Finance Ministry or Central Bank website. It was published in March 2019, and it had 3 pillars. One was we were going to gradually reduce our dependence on external borrowing. Because if you suddenly reduce it, you have what is known as a rollover problem, because you suddenly have much less foreign exchange to pay for your imports and to pay your debt servicing bills. So you can't suddenly reduce it, but you can gradually reduce it. And at the same time, you increase the average term to maturity, the maturity of the debt that you owe, rather. And you reduce the short-term debt, which is part 2 and 3 are linked. So this is what we try to do. For instance, a lot of people say, why is it that ISBs, international sovereign bonds, went from 5 billion to 15 billion between 2015 and 2019? A large part of the reason is what was instrument switching. Because Sri Lanka had 3.5 billion of foreign money in our rupee securities, in our treasury bills and bonds. And those cost about 12-13%, the cost, the interest. International sovereign bonds were about 6-7%. So these were 13%. And this money is highly volatile. The money comes in from abroad, portfolio investment from abroad, it goes into treasury bills and bonds. And then if, for instance, American interest rates go up, and then they shift out to take advantage of that, and it rushes out. Or if something happens in our country, like, I don't know, a constitutional crisis or an Easter bombing or something like that, again, money rushes out. So this money goes in and out very fast. We had about $3.5 billion of that money. and it was creating a lot of instability in our exchange rate, and it also constrained our monetary policy because we couldn't change interest rates when we thought they should be, because if we reduce the differential between the American benchmark rates and our rate, then money could go out then as well, even though we needed a low interest rate for ourselves. So it was a very, very negative kind of factor to have so much money in our portfolio, hot money in our government securities. So we ran it down from 3.5 billion to 600 million, and that roughly 3 billion was shifted to international sovereign bonds because they are of longer term. They are 5 and 10-year maturity. And while we had to pay 12 and 13% to this money, which was in government, Sri Lanka government securities, we could borrow at 6 and 7% as international sovereign bond. So that was one switch of 3.5 billion. Then another switch was we had 2.5 billion of short-term swaps. And that again being very short-term, 12 months or less, we extended the maturity by pushing that money also into international sovereign bonds. So that's again 5 and 10 years. So of the delta of the increase from 5 to 15 billion, 5 billion was through this switching of instruments. Then another 2 billion in 2019. Normally one borrows about 2.5 billion a year, but 4.5 billion was borrowed in 2019 because there was a second bond issued. In March, one bond was issued for the money for 2019, but then we had the Easter bombings. It became clear that the government would change probably by that time. And then by June, the decision was taken that we should borrow more money to build up our reserves to have a buffer, because with the change in government and the elections, etc., there could be a time when we were not able to access markets because of the various instability that usually comes with elections. So that was another 2 billion. So really about almost 7 billion to 8 billion of the 10 billion delta was due to this expenditure, due to this instrument switching and the additional money that was taken on to build a buffer. So that, I'm explaining that because often it is said that it is really the increase from 5 to 15 billion of the international sovereign bonds that's the main problem. But while that went up by 10 billion, other types of debt came down. It's the portfolio investment in government securities and the short-term swaps came down. Well, this went up. And also really by that time, Verite has done some research which shows that of the money borrowed between 2015 and 2019, 89% went to repay money that was borrowed earlier. Over the years, for many years, we've been borrowing. So that repayment of all those debts absorbed 89% of the money that was raised as loans between 2015 and 2019. So we were in a very bad situation. And how does one get out of that situation, as I said, is you have to increase, first thing to do is to run primary surpluses in the budget so that you are not adding on to your debt stock every year. That's one. So it was achieved in 2017, 2018, but then again it slipped. And you must increase non-debt creating inflows like exports, tourism, remittances, FDI. So those are all non-debt creating inflows. So we should maximize those, reduce the debts, and at the same time, stop adding on to the debt stock by running primary surpluses. So that is really the game plan for solving the debt problem. But before we could do that, and we also had policy reversals that kind of interrupted us trying to do that, we ended up having this crisis. In future, these are lessons we need to learn. And all of you, while you're following what's going on, you should use your influence to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes again. Let me now, so I kind of told you about the macroeconomic stress, what it is, what are the causes of it, What are the consequences of it? And what are some of the measures that were being taken? I should mention, I said, I talked to you about the Sri Lanka medium-term debt management strategy. You should have a look at it if you're interested. But another thing that was done before I move on to the last section is the enactment of the Active Liability Management Act in 2018. What that did, this was all trying to create a better kind of debt management framework for the country because we saw that we were going towards a train crash. And this, what it did was it gave the central bank more tools to deal with debt management. What it permitted the central bank to do is to opportunistically go to the market when the interest rates were low and conditions were favorable and raise some money which were not part of the Appropriation Act. Because usually what happens is every year Parliament passes the Appropriation Act of all the expenditures, revenue, etc. Then there is a financing gap, and then there is a program to finance the gap. Part of it domestically, part of it externally. And that's what sets the framework. Here, you are allowed to go, you were through the Active Liability Act, allowed to go outside that framework and raise additional money, but with parliamentary approval. You couldn't just do it. But if for this additional money, for each transaction under the Active Liability Act, you had to get parliamentary approval, but you could go and raise money and use that money to maybe pay, particularly if conditions were more favorable and you could raise money more cheaply to pay off some of the more expensive debt, etc. So there were various techniques of liability management that are available. And to enable that, this Active Liability Management Act was passed. Interestingly, on the very day that Parliament gave approval for the first operation under this Active Liability Management Act, on that very day, we had the constitutional crisis in October 2018 when the government was changed. And so that was it. That went down, we were not able to complete that transaction. So these are kind of some of the disruptions that take place, which, where you need to have governance that is stable to be able to manage, particularly in a market-oriented economy, in an economy that has market access, an economy that is now dependent on having access to capital markets. We're an economy which has to have a high enough rating to be able to have that access. So those are the kinds of parameters within which we now work and which we did not adjust to. And so now itself, these are lessons we should learn and going forward. So this is a story really about how debt became a problem, increasing problem, how it was recognized and efforts were being made to try to address it. Then we changed course and had a different strategy. And now we're back to the same kind of strategy again. So one of the most important lessons, I know some of you may be part of this Next Gen Sri Lanka group that's working on a common minimum program for all the political parties. And that kind of work is important. It's very important that we have consensus and we go on one track. India had a major crisis, not quite as bad as our current crisis, but major crisis in 1991. And they went to the IMF. But they have never been to the IMF again since then. Because they felt ashamed. They said, we're not going to do this again. And, there's a very interesting anecdote. Mr. Narasimha Rao was the Prime Minister of India at the time. And when India went to the IMF, they got a very tough program, somewhat similar to what we have now, but not quite as tough. And Dr. Manmohan Singh was the finance minister at that time. So Mr. Manmohan Singh went with the program to his Prime Minister Narasimha Rao and said, sir, this is a really tough program. You're going to have very great difficulty in convincing your cabinet to accept it, leave alone the country. So Narasimha Rao thought for a minute and told Dr. Manmohan Singh, give me 20 minutes, I will come back to you. So in less than 20 minutes, Narasimha Rao called Dr. Singh back and said, okay, go ahead. So Dr. Singh was amazed. He said, so how do you manage to get this consensus so quickly? And this is what's really important. And Narasimha Rao said, I only had to make one call. And that was to the leader of the opposition, Mr. Vajpayee. I told him the situation, and he said, and I said, and he had and told him that without this, India will crash. We have to go through this program. And Vajpayee had said, well, if it's necessary for India, we will support it. We may criticize you in parliament, but go through with it. We won't let it go down. So that's the kind of consensus we have to build. That's the kind of cooperation we have to build in our polity, so that we agree. So from that time, the BJP and the Congress have had a very similar framework. Of course, it changes here and there in the margins, but the overall framework, particularly the macroeconomic framework, had been agreed since 91. It's the same thing. So that is where we need to get to, and I hope the work that NextGen and others are doing, that we will get there. We have to get there. We can't have this policy slippage, not only policy slippage, we have 180-degree policy reversals from time to time. It just is not going to work like that. So we have to change it. Okay, so that's the macroeconomic stress. What are the things that are being done to address it? And finally, what about the future? How are we going to get growth going? How are we going to get employment going? Before that, I must say something a little bit about poverty before I get to the future. Sri Lanka, about 2017, 2018, poverty was about, that is absolute poverty, at an income threshold of $3.40 per day, was about 6%. It has gone up close to now 26%. In a matter of 5-6 years, and our people are having significant difficulties. There is some. If you all have time, I've sent this to Namini. This is a speech by the Secretary of the Treasury, Mahendra Sriwardhan. I took some data from his speech in the impact of the crisis on households. 60% of households have experienced a decline in income, in the average monthly income, as a result of the crisis. 60% decline in average monthly income. 91% have experienced an increase in their average monthly expenditure. 27% have incurred debt due to the crisis. 7% have changed their health treatment because of the crisis. 55% of those in the 3 to 21 year age group have had their education affected by the crisis. So this is a terrible situation that needs to be addressed. So we need to get growth going again and get the economy going. In the meantime, we need to protect the most vulnerable through income transfers. And that's where the Aspesima program comes in. Now, the Samriddhi program, was poorly designed. And a lot of people who deserved to get it didn't get it. People who didn't deserve it got it. All kinds of mess about that. And now the amount has been tripled. The budgetary allocation for Aspesima is 3 times what was for Samriddhi. And the targeting, though, has to be improved. Now, there was actually an attempt. The World Bank supported, there's a welfare board that has been set up to look at all these programs. And they did try to do it in a very systematic way to make sure that the design of the program was good and the targeting was good. But I see now, again, politics is creeping in. So we really have to get this right and not get into this kind of thing. And again, the thing to do is to digitalize. India has the Aadhaar scheme. It does its income transfers through the Aadhaar scheme, where everybody has a unique digital ID and they have bank accounts. We have a national identity card which can be digitalized. A lot of people have bank accounts in Sri Lanka, partly because of the remittances, etc. So we have the ingredients are all there, but somehow we can't get it done. So we have to get it done and provide a good safety net, well-targeted safety net for those who need it. But we just don't have enough money to really be giving it around all over the place. And the right instrument is an income transfer. Put money into the hand of people who need it for them to spend it to support themselves. Not to subsidize electricity, subsidize fuel, because most of the subsidy goes to the non-poor, to the wealthy. That's what's happened for years in our system. And that also distorts relative prices and leads to a misallocation of resources. That is a very messy way of trying to help people. The right way is to give income transfers to those who need it, and to clearly identify those who need it in an objective way, and design a program that gives them enough support for them to survive, and also give them time to get to look for jobs, etc. But for that, the economy has to create jobs, and we have to have recovery. So what is being done for recovery now? Namini, have I run out of time?
Yes, doctor, a little bit.
Okay. Can
Maybe
give me about 6 minutes? I'll finish.
Okay, doctor. Okay, doctor.
Okay. That may be quick. So one thing is, I said the second part is lack of structural reforms. Why is it? We've talked about structural reforms. What are these structural reforms? It's things like the factor market reform, that's land and labor market reform, investment climate, investment promotion, trade policy, including trade agreements, the single window in customs, education, training, and skills development. All these things we have talked about. In the 1980s, I was a bag carrier for Mr. Ronnie DeMel, the late Mr. Ronnie DeMel, who was finance minister for almost 10 years. And for about 5 years or more, I was his bag carrier, and I used to go around. I used to listen to his speeches. And what he said in terms of the structural reform that we need in the 1980s were exactly the same things we are saying even now. Even when I was in the central bank, I found I was making the same speeches on structural reforms as he was making. So 1980s and 1924, still the same story. We're still trying to do the same thing. So we have to get things done. So the things that I mentioned, we have to do that will improve the productivity in the economy. And the one other thing we need to do is really on exports. J.R. Jawaharlal, when he liberalized his economy in 1977, said, export or perish. But we never really have had an export transformation. As I said, China, big country, Singapore, small country, FDI has driven the export transformation. We have done badly on FDI. We have done badly on exports. So we have to change that. That has to be changed. But, there are about 15 new laws that are coming in, which I'm going to quickly run through them. Public Finance Management Bill, Public Debt Management Bill, Economic Transaction. That's going to be a separate office to manage the public debt in the future. Economic Transformation Bill, Management of SOE Law, Public-Private Partnership Law, Investment Law, Public Procurement Law, Unified Labor Law, Food Security Bill, Public Asset Management Bill, Microfinance and Credit Regulatory Authority Bill, the Secure Transaction Bill, Offshore Economic Management Bill, Law to Facilitate Proposed Agricultural Land Lease Program, and all these are laws which are coming in, which we have to, it's fine to talk about this. It's fine to have laws, but you have to implement them and make them work. We have to increase productivity in the economy. Sectors like agriculture, if you want good quality, inclusive growth, agriculture has to go up. Agriculture, 25% of the labor force gives us only 7% of GDP because productivity is so low. We have to find ways of improving that. And in the discussion, I'm happy to address some of those things. We need digitalization, press ahead with digitalization. We need to make use of our location. Location is magnificent. There are ways and means we need to find to make sure that we take advantage of our location in the terms of attracting investment. The logistics sector is one area, and there are others which we need to do. So there are a number of other things. Tourism is a very low-hanging fruit. So there are a number of areas, number of opportunities. We need to take advantage of them. We need to create the framework to take advantage of them. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I've taken so long. How long did I take? Namini, I'm done.
Yes, Doctor, thank you very much for the insightful presentation. Now I think we all have a very clear-cut idea about actually what brought us, means our country, into this situation. And actually now it is the time for your questions. I hope
Namini,
they are... Yes, Doctor.
Namini, they can ask in any language they want to, and you can help me maybe translate the single
Yes,
FS.
doctor, definitely. Actually, I think language also should not be a barrier for our knowledge development and enhancement. So you can ask your question in any language that is convenient to you, and we will be translating it to the doctor. Who will be asking the first question? Navodya?
Yes, Miss. Am I available?
Navodini, the line is not clear.
Hello.
Yes, Navodini.
Now am I available?
Yes, Navodini. We can hear you.
Okay. Sir, my question is, uh, the government receives tax money through Sri Lanka's tax. So the government uses this money for the payment of government employee salaries, education, health, and etc. But the upper middle and lower middle people who pay these taxes will compromise on the expenses and will pay these taxes somehow. Sir, so your opinion, will the government continue to maintain this tax policy, and how successful is it?
Okay. Yes, certainly the tax compliance with the tax regulations is extremely poor in Sri Lanka, right? And the wealthy do not pay tax. A lot of the professionals, as you know, lawyers, doctors, architects, various professionals, a lot of them do not pay the tax they should be paying. Then in the other thing is that our taxes also were not very progressive. Progressive means the basic principle of taxation is based on taxing those who have the capacity to pay, right? You tax the people who have the capacity to pay more. So that principle we were not very good at. We had a very regressive tax system. For instance, the normal rule of thumb is that you should collect 40% of your income through direct taxes and 60% through indirect taxes. We collect about 80% through indirect taxes, which indirect taxes, the same rate is imposed on the whole population, rich or poor. Direct taxes are progressive with the rich paying more. So we have to shift and collect more direct taxes. Now, there is going to be a property tax introduced in January of 2025, which will make our system more progressive. And also this technology, the RAMIS technology, which now is linking high value transactions to inland revenue. If that is implemented effectively, then the inland revenue will be able to get more information on what the wealthy are spending their money. And then they can ask them, how did you get this money to buy this condominium? How did you get this money to buy this car? How did you get this money to buy this land, etc.? So with the improvement in tax administration, with a higher rate of tax for the more wealthy, introduction of property taxes, I think we will have a fairer tax system in the future. And if tax administration is effective and everybody has a tax identification number and they can't do many things without it, I think you will see compliance also improving. Is that okay, Navodini?
And doctor, I think Dr. Navodini got her answer, and there is another hand raised, Parakrama Girihagama.
Thanks, Namini. Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening.
Yeah, most of the policy makers in terms of fiscal and monetary, they're talking about reforms in terms of fiscal and monetary. But as a real fact, Doctor, GDP, increasing of GDP constantly is a necessary for a country to develop. So in terms of our three sectors, basically agriculture, industries, and services, what are the mechanisms, what are the tools you propose to increase GDP constantly at a 10% rate or 10% plus rate to achieve within, say, 7 years of doubling the income like this kind of thing? How do you propose, Doctor?
Okay. I must say, I would be very happy if we can get to 5 or 6 to start with, and after that, hopefully we can get to 10. But even to get to 5 or 6. Okay, let me take each of the sectors, if I may, and try to give you an answer. First thing is to have this stability, right? You have to have macro stability. Without that, it's very difficult. So we have now talked about macro stability. Now, agriculture, as I said, we have 20% of the labor force in agriculture, giving us only 7%, right, of GDP. So we have to get productivity up in agriculture. What we are doing now is we are keeping people's noses above the water through free water, through a guaranteed price, uh, uh, highly subsidized or free fertilizer inputs, etc. But they are stuck there. They don't go anything beyond that. So what can we do to improve this productivity in agriculture? One is clearly, the size holdings, the land holdings, particularly in the wet zone, have got fragmented to the point where many of them are uneconomic, and it's difficult for them to practice modern agriculture in such small plots. So what they have done in Thailand, for instance, is they have had these farmer associations. I mean, it could be cooperative, but in Thailand, it's very, very successful. They've had these various farmer associations where farmers come together. They do common procurement, etc., which brings down their costs, and even their marketing they are able to do in a more effective way because they have a larger critical mass. So one is that, creating farmer associations of the smallholders. The second thing is we have this massive post-harvest losses. Something like 35 to 40% of the agricultural output is lost through poor transport and lack of refrigeration. So the supply chain has to be strengthened. The big companies, for instance, need to invest in better transport, better refrigeration, etc., and to purchase from the farmers and to reduce this terrible loss. I mean, think of having 40% more supplies in the agricultural sector, 35 to 40%. That is just lost. If you reduce it by half and reduce it to 20%, there's a big, big boost in terms of agricultural output. That's the second thing. And third thing is, we need to do a very thorough review of our land use and crop mix. Have we got the optimal land use and crop mix now? For instance, in my view, we can produce all the paddy we need in the irrigated dry zone, right? Using good agricultural practices, we can get all the rice up there. Then the wet zone can be used to produce higher value agricultural products like fruit and vegetables. So like that, we need to make sure that we use our land most effectively. And also there are some changes in law that are necessary. For instance, the Paddy Land Act, do we still need it? Or is that holding things back? Because we need to maybe have some land consolidation also to have more commercial agriculture. Now, there was a professor, excuse me, there was Professor Ricardo Hausman from Harvard and a team who came and did some work about 6, 7 years ago. And they said the proportion of the labor force in agriculture for a country at Sri Lanka's level of development should be about 15 or 16%, not 25. But then what are we going to do with that 10% who shift out of agriculture over time? Can't be done suddenly, but over time. So we need to get the other sectors going as well. So manufacturing, certainly agro-processing and agriculture-based manufacturing is an area that can be improved and needs to be improved. The other thing here is, in manufacturing, the most dynamic component of the manufacturing sector, the international trade system, is these cross-border supply chains, right? Now, we have excluded ourselves from these supply chains. We have very little penetration of regional and global supply chains because we have put these CESAs and PAL, CESAs and PAL in the middle, para-tariffs. So what you have in the modern trading system is where you have some material brought in, then the country concerned doing whatever it does in the chain and sending it out, right? Now, if you put a para-tariff by way of a cess or PAL or something like that in the middle, you become uncompetitive. So by having PAL and these cesses, we have made ourselves uncompetitive and have excluded ourselves from the regional and global supply chains. And that is a massive opportunity we have lost. Now the government has decided to remove PAL and cesses, but they have to do it gradually because of the revenue implications. So hopefully that we are going in the right direction there. So and that will give a boost to the manufacturing sector. The other thing is when it comes to manufacturing and services too, particularly shipping and logistics, we have to take advantage of what is happening in India. Now, if you look at what happened in East and Southeast Asia, when first Japan and then China had their growth surges, all the countries in the region were able to hook on to the supply chains and also go up with those, with first Japan and then China. Now, India is having its growth spurt. People are saying it's going to grow at 8-10% over the next decade or so. Then there must be opportunities for us. One thing is, in the past, we had very poor infrastructure in both countries. Now both countries are improving their infrastructure. Roads are improving, ports and airports are improving, railways are improving, so that the transaction costs of doing cross-border supply chains between India and Sri Lanka have come down. So India is growing faster and transaction costs are coming down. And the India has this neighborhood first policy that it's always talking about. If you bring all these things together, there is a massive opportunity for us to hook into these new supply chains that are emerging in India and get a part of it for ourselves as well. Now, for instance, after COVID, it is not only cost that is determining supply chain, there's resilience as well. So if there's a very large investment in India, they could improve the resilience of their supply chain by having a smaller installation in Colombo, by, in terms of their disaster management strategy. So there are various ways like that. Or they could have their head offices in Sri Lanka, because Sri Lanka is a far better, more amenable place to live than anywhere in India. So they can have their big manufacturing installation in India, but they can have their head office in Colombo. So there are various ways we can do that. In the services sector, shipping is, with India's trade growth is going to be dramatically fast. So the demand for shipping and logistics is going to grow through the roof in India. And we have a deep water port, which India does not have. And so that is a massive potential, our ports. So like that, there are various ways, really, I think, we can have faster growth, but we need to be very agile. We have to be very agile in terms of looking for the opportunities. And also we must be totally pragmatic and not let emotion get in our way. There is, even between Taiwan and China, there is a large amount of trade and investment. The East Asians, they are very pragmatic, and they don't let emotion get in the way. Japan and Korea have a very troubled history. Japan and China have a troubled history, but that doesn't stop them from having a lot of trade and investment and doing a lot of commercial business with each other. We need to have that same attitude and look for the opportunities and not let, various emotional things get in the way. And, now we are also having this improved connectivity between India and China. So tourism hopefully will improve, not only tourism, but lots of other things. Another big sector is the renewable energy sector. Now, the wind power, particularly in the Mana area, is supposed to there's a massive opportunity there. So that is an area we can develop and export to India. So there are lots of opportunities available. We need to get the structure, all these laws that I read out to you, get some of those done, as many of those done as possible, create a good investment climate, have stable macroeconomics, have stable politics, have a national consensus on the development strategy. And then I think we can, as you say, we can even get to 10% over time.
Thank you so much, Doctor. It is very comprehensive answer.
Thank you.
Doctor, I'm from Kalutara. I'm under the Bimsara.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How can Sri Lankan government implement strategies to mitigate the impact of its economic crisis on investors and sustain visitors' interest amidst challenging economic conditions?
So how to reduce the impact of the crisis on investors, right? That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah. So clearly, one thing that investors want is stability. Because you remember, there are hundreds of countries all looking for investment. So now we don't have a very large domestic market. Some FDI comes what they call seeking markets. So people go to India for looking to sell into their market, go to China to sell into their market, maybe even countries like Indonesia, etc. But in our case, our market is too small for us people to come only for the market. So they will come if they get some efficiency gains by coming to Sri Lanka. So for that, you have to have, as I said, macro stability, political stability, a good legal system, and they need to be confident that they can impose their contracts. They have to be convinced that, for instance, things like the utilities, electricity, etc., is regular and is at a reasonable price. Now, our electricity generation has been extremely inefficient and very expensive, though now efforts are being made to bring about some improvement. So that also has to be looked after. And also, finally, people need to have confidence that policy won't change. Just because the government change, you won't have a 180-degree change in policy. So we have to have a consensus, as India has achieved after 91. We need to have a consensus. Not only India, whether it's Malaysia or Thailand or Vietnam now, they have a broad consensus on their economic policies. They don't go up and down. That again, we must have that. So I think, it is we have to give a very clear image to investors that there is stability and there is efficiency, both. So those are the things we need to work. Now, for instance, the government approvals need to work very efficiently and fast. So stability, efficiency, I think we can deliver on those two fronts. I think we can even, beyond this crisis, get beyond the crisis by improving the investment climate and the confidence investors have in Sri Lanka. And the one thing I forgot is the debt restructuring. We have made a lot of progress on the debt restructuring. We have completed domestic debt restructuring. We have achieved agreement in principle with the bilateral creditors. And I know there's been some negative press about the commercial creditors, but there also a lot of progress has been made. And I'm confident, within a few weeks, they'll be able to reach agreement in principle with the commercial creditors as well, so that the debt restructuring can be completed by about June. So that will also give confidence to investors, because at the moment they look at us as a country in default. So they place a very high risk premium on Sri Lanka, and that discourages them from investing in Sri Lanka.
Thank you so much.
Okay, no problem.
Hi, sir.
Hi.
This is Amraz.
Hi.
I am the Liberal Youth Movement Tamil Medium Coordinator. First of all, thank you for arranging those type of webinars to motivate us. In my point of question is that, in what ways can the central bank support the government's efforts toward economic liberalization while ensuring the financial stability?
Okay, what can the central bank do? The most important thing the central bank can do is to contain inflation at the target. You know, inflation is a highly regressive tax. It's an implicit tax, right? So if you have high inflation, one, it becomes very difficult for businesses to make their plans when prices are rising very fast. Two, inflation affects the poor much more than disproportionately than the wealthy, because the wealthy own assets, which in a context of inflation will also gain value. So they act as a hedge against those assets of the rich, act as a hedge against inflation. The poor don't own any assets. So it really hits them very hard. So both in terms of equity and also in terms of business planning and particularly with the long-term horizon, inflation has to be kept down. And that is the most important thing. It is the primary objective of the central bank. And that by keeping inflation at the targeted level, the central bank will be giving extremely important and valuable support to the economy. That's one. Second is the financial system. The financial system is the lifeblood of the economy. Banks, non-bank financial institutions, etc., all of them. So they do this in financial intermediation, without which the economy will not work. And so you have to have a very stable financial system. And that's the second thing the central bank can do to support the economy. So two things: keep prices stable, make sure the financial system is stable. And there are other things like there's a new function the central bank has got is macro-prudential surveillance. That is to really scan the horizon and see whether there are any risks coming into the economy, and to identify those risks and take mitigation action in a proactive way, and not wait for the risks to materialize and have a negative impact on the economy. So these are some of the things the central bank can do, but more than anything, keep prices stable. The central bank is not a development bank. Its job is not to create jobs and to directly boost growth. That's the job of the rest of the government. There are so many ministries and departments to do that. Central bank, keep prices stable, make sure the financial system is stable, and now this new function of macroprudential stability, make sure central bank identifies the emerging risks early and formulates good strategies to mitigate it. Is that okay?
Yeah, okay, sir. Thank you for your clarifications.
Okay.
So I am Sachitra Karyasam from Madara.
Hello.
I'm an entrepreneur.
Hi. Go ahead.
So my question is, in the current social political situation, many political leaders are talking about entrepreneurship in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
So my question is, what kind of impact has there been on the manufacturing economy, or entrepreneurship in Sri Lanka after the current economic crisis?
Yeah. Okay. So clearly the crisis has affected the SME sector very badly. There have been, that's probably the sector that has been most damaged. So going forward, one of the things that will have to happen, and I think the government has created now, if I'm not mistaken, a new guarantee scheme, which will help the banks to be able to lend to SMEs again. But one bad thing that I'm hearing is this suspension of the parate execution. Because what that does is that once they can't effect parate execution, banks will increase the risk premium they attach to their lending. Their risk appetite will go down, and the risk premium they attach to their lending will go up. So the SMEs, the cost of credit for the SMEs will go up. And also, because their risk appetite has gone down, they may not even make credit available to some SMEs to whom they would have made credit available if Parate execution was available. So it's a singularly bad thing to suspend Parate. And I don't know, the government seems to be wanting to do it, but I think that's a very bad measure. But so it's not going to help the SMEs. But the guarantee scheme will. And I think if you have stability, again, I come back to stability all the time. If there is stability in terms of prices and the exchange rate, etc., then it'll be easier for the manufacturing sector the small manufacturers, the entrepreneurs, to plan ahead in terms of their investment and their marketing, etc. So you don't have to do specific things in terms of handouts. Just by creating stability, you make a better environment for entrepreneurs to plan and to market more effectively. And as I said, there is this guarantee scheme, and I hope this Parate execution suspension, if it does go ahead, is removed very quickly. All that I hope. And if the economy begins to grow, then the domestic supply chains also will increase. And this is something we have to do very vigorously, is really as an entrepreneur, I hope you're thinking in terms of how you can get into supply chains. You don't have to be able to sell your final product to the market. If you can, that's fine. But the other option is to get into the supply chain of a much larger enterprise, which is able to get credit, has more command over credit, has more command over the market, etc. And you are able to get into the supply chain, and you then, that's another way of basically promoting your business. So selling direct to the market, getting into a supply chain, both are avenues that are available to you as an entrepreneur. And if the government provides a stable environment, then it makes it much easier for you to do your business.
Okay, thank you, sir. I have another question.
Okay.
Nowadays, most politicians are talking about in manufacturing economy. So, do you recommend supporting this manufacturing economy?
Yes, I do. I mean, I am not somebody who believes that manufacturing and services are kind of mutually exclusive. People say, look, Sri Lanka should be a service economy and, not a manufacturing economy. We are too small, etc. That is, if you think of, manufacturing cars and selling cars, or manufacturing big machinery and selling machinery. Okay, we can't do that, but we can certainly get into supply chains. I think there's the classic example. I think his name is Mr. Palewatta. I think he produces a sensor for motor vehicles. He has made a massive business out of that, right? That is that kind of man. That's a template that we should follow. And you should listen to him. I heard him speak once. He was very inspirational. Those type of things where we get into an international supply chain that has a much bigger market. So we have these niches we can get into and do manufacturing. We don't have to produce a whole car or some large machinery or a full, it could be even a component of if Apple is coming into India in a big way, maybe bits of that supply chain can be routed here. We can try, because they're coming into South India. That's the other thing. India is growing fast, but South India is growing even most quickly. So we can plug into South India because we have the proximity too.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
Yes, Udeni, you can ask the question. Udeni. Udeni, can you hear us? Yes, Udeni.
Hello.
Yes, Udeni, we can hear you.
Okay.
Pose the question.
Okay. Hello, sir.
Hello.
Hello. I am representing the Gold District. First of all, I would like to thank for Dr. Coomaraswamy and the Alignment Organization of providing this opportunity and the knowledge. Sir, as we explore the economic resilience and sustainable growth in the significance of subsidy program in Sri Lanka become apparent, I want to hear from you. Could you please explain the primary objectives behind the government subsidy program in Sri Lanka and how successfully they have been in achieving these goals?
Okay. So let me divide the question up into subsidies which are part of the social safety net and other subsidies which are supporting production of some sort. Okay? So as far as subsidies for the social safety net, I was talking earlier that, giving a subsidy for what do you call it, for fertilizer, or giving a subsidy for some other item that is needed for production, I don't think it's a good idea. Because it means you may divert resources from a more productive area into a less productive area simply because there is a subsidy there. And so the overall impact is negative in terms of growth and employment and incomes. So subsidies for production, I'm against. I'm also against tax concessions. Because, we have a serious problem in terms of revenue. As a country, though our revenue went down to 8% a couple of years ago, of 8% of GDP, we used to collect over 20% of GDP as revenue, right up to about the mid-1990s. That is because a lot of revenue was collected from tea, rubber, and coconut, particularly tea. But then, reduction in prices and increase in costs, including labor costs, etc., quite naturally, those people were very badly off earlier, has squeezed the margins, and we are no longer getting much tax from that sector. The new growth sectors, like apparel, like IT, like tourism, when they're not disrupted by events, have made plenty of money but have not paid any taxes because they've had tax holidays. So that, to me, that doesn't make sense. So if you're going to give a subsidy for production purposes, in my view, I don't think one should have it, but if one wants to, you should give what they call investment allowances, upfront subsidies to promote capital formation. So what you can do is say you have an investment of 100 million, you can set off that 100 million against tax upfront. So it's an investment allowance. But as soon as you start operations and start making a profit, you have to pay taxes. The 2018 Indian Revenue Act did this. It shifted to upfront investment allowances, whereby concessions were linked to creating capital, formation, to promoting capital formation, not allowing people making profits a concession to get them not to pay any tax. So that is in terms of production, as I say, if you want to give subsidies for production, give it upfront to promote capital formation. In terms of subsidies for the social safety net, don't subsidize fuel or electricity, have cost-reflective pricing there, because in the past we've subsidized it. CEBs, CPC have made massive losses. Those have been put onto the balance sheets of the state banks, and that has put their balance sheets in terrible difficulty. The government had to allocate $450 billion as possible money that will be used to recapitalize the state bank. So we don't want to get into that kind of mess. So don't subsidize that. Have cost-reflective pricing across the board. So don't subsidize services for social safety net. Give a cash transfer directly into the hands of those who need it and deserve it. And in a very well, as I said, a well-designed program where eligibility is carefully constructed, and the assessment should be developed as such a program. Samruddhi was very ineffective. Assessment, I hope, will be better. That's for the social safety net. And as I said, in terms of subsidies or concessions for productive activity, give it as upfront investment allowance to promote capital formation, not let people get off paying tax once they start making profits. Is that okay with any?
Okay, sir, but not only that. Do you think that the ongoing process of subsidy program of Sri Lanka is aimed at the most needed and the vulnerable category?
It hasn't been. It hasn't been. For instance, the Samruddhi program, there is clear evidence that some of the people who are needy were not getting it. And some people who were not needing it were getting it, simply because it was politicized so much. So it was ineffective, I would say. It was not meeting its objective. And even now, for instance, the subsidies on fuel and electricity, they were benefiting the rich much more than the poor. Because they were the people who are consuming more electricity and fuel, and they were getting subsidized electricity and fuel when they don't need to do it. So, and the CPC and the CEB were making losses, and they're undermining the balance sheets of the state banks. So all that, shouldn't happen. So it was not effective at all. But now with full cost reflective pricing for electricity and fuel, and supported by an ASPESMA program, which is giving more money, and I hope it will be better targeted. I don't know yet. I hope it will be better targeted.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
But I am a believer in free education and free health. That is important. Certainly, you can have the option of private if people want to go, but I think that is something that we need to continue to provide a baseline of of support for the people.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Your satisfactory answer.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Hello, Santi.
Good evening. Present, sir. Okay, thank you for the opportunity. So, I'm Sandra Omar from Banticolo. I'm a lecturer attached with the Southeastern University in economics. So,
Hello.
I want to ask the question. Can you hear?
Yes, yeah. Please, go ahead. I can hear you.
Yes. I think so. Since 1977, we liberalized. It has been said there's no globalization without making localization. So still, in particular, in the eastern part, there are not that much productive way to contribute to the national economy purpose. So this is the one point. Another one I want to ask, we are importing the onion, potatoes. So we studied the comparative advantage. So opportunity based on the opportunity cost. Still, our country depend on this agriculture. Why? What is the reason? One question. Another one, we are the agriculture price production is high, but we are importing the inputs. Inputs in main fertilizer from the other country. Why we cannot produce? Second one. Third one, we are the many number of youths, the labor productive people in here in Sri Lanka. What we are not utilizing so far. But these are things, even for example, we are producing every year in the university 35 graduates. If we are graduate, I don't know what they are going to contribute for the country, at least in the self-subsistence in our country economy. These are the things. This why I think the graduates they cannot produce in the agriculture sector or any other manufacturing. So another one, the local government, they have plenty of land, everything, but still we are not utilizing. What are the problem actually in our country? How we can develop in the regional wise? Please, could you please elaborate, Doctor? Thank you.
Okay, those are big questions. Now, I think you're right. Over 40% of GDP comes from the Western province, right? So, and of course, the Eastern province is one of the provinces with probably the lowest contribution to national GDP. What are some of the reasons why we are uncompetitive in terms of producing, say, onions or potatoes or even some manufactured items? The thing is, as I was telling you during my earlier talk, we have very high interest rates, right? We have the high interest rates because of that part of the macroeconomic stress narrative. The government needs to borrow large amounts of money. So for the government to be able to raise that money, it has to pay high interest rates. So that sets the benchmark. The treasury bill and treasury bond rates set the benchmark, and they are high because the government has to borrow a lot of money. That interest rate is high. So therefore, interest costs, finance costs are high. That makes us uncompetitive. Two, we have, as I said, often we have an overvalued exchange rate, which subsidizes foreign producers at the expense of domestic producers, right? Because foreigners, if it's an overvalued exchange rate, you need less rupees to buy foreign products. Exporters get less rupees for their exports with an overvalued exchange rate. So we got it the wrong way around. For much of the time, we've had it the wrong way around. So that also works against developing a production economy. Both interest rates and exchange rate work against. Then things like electricity, right? That is a utility that is, it's a key component of cost for many economic activities. Our long-term generation plan doesn't exist properly at all. We haven't had a proper long-term generation plan to minimize our electricity costs, right? And even within what we have, I'm told there are all kinds of malpractice in terms of dispatch and various things like that. Then these power purchase agreements, they say there is a lot of corruption there, and again, the prices are too high. All this contributes to electricity costs being higher than they need be. That also reduces our competitiveness. Then, in the past, in agriculture, for instance, as I was telling you, these post-harvest losses. We don't have refrigeration and good transport. In manufacturing, as I said, the PAL and the CES have excluded us from regional and global supply chains. So if you look at all these things, they are all working against developing a production economy. So we need to, really, I'm sure I'm missing a number of other things. So we need to improve on all these fronts to be able to create a platform where it becomes, which enables competitive production to take place in the country. At the moment, we don't have it because of all these reasons. Does that make sense?
Hello, sir. Okay, okay. Yes, sir. Because what I asked the question, because last, I think during the COVID-19 period, the lockdown, then travel restriction. That time, one region supply high, other region excess demand. So these are the things. There are so many things we learned from the during the COVID-19. But it's still not government recovering this production, which area high production, how they are going to supply chain. So it's still not doing. I think so. They are even the local government. They are those who are coming there selecting the people. Don't have any other such a policy. The economy, how they are going to develop. These are the things still we are ground level we are facing the problem, doctor. This this should be recovered. I think so.
Yeah, in my view, two things. You also asked me about land. Let me answer that and then come to what you just told me. Land, about 80% of the land is owned by the government. And it is just impossible. The forest department, the Mahavali, all kinds of people own land. And then, the post office department and the railways own very valuable land in the towns around the country. Because, they are the post office and the railway station are, centrally located. And there is land around them, which is very valuable, but they're just lying idle. So those can be, activated for economic activity. So and the government has it, so it's very difficult for anybody to get land. It's very difficult to get land off the government. So that is one of the problems as far as your issue about land is concerned. Government is trying to change it. There is now a bill, I think, coming to Parliament to facilitate it. But in the past, it's been a big problem. Okay, that's the land. Now, sorry, what did you just tell me? Please tell me briefly what you just said. It slipped my mind.
Regarding the local government, sir?
Yeah, yeah. So local,
yeah.
I tell you, we have for 78 years, we've depended on the government. And it has gone down and down. I have been a government servant all my life, but I must say, why should we depend on the government? Why can't we if the government can give us stability, political stability, if it can give us, macroeconomic stability and a legal system that works, we should be able to then take advantage of that stability and make things happen on our own. If we sit back and wait for the government, I'm not sure it's going to happen. I'm 74 years old now, and I have been waiting for the government to do things. I have worked for the government to try to help to do things. I'm not encouraged by what has happened so far. And I'm not sure it's going to get much better in the future. But if the government can do the few basic things right and create this stable platform, then it's up to people to take opportunities into their hand and go ahead. But the government mustn't block them, by on land or on, whatever. The government sometimes blocks people.
Okay, sir. Thank you for your valuable thoughts, sir. Thanks a lot.
No problem.
Okay.
And also there is a question in the chat box, doctor. May I read that?
Yes, please.
This is by Udit Kanchana.
Okay.
During the period of 2015 to 2019, the Yahapalana government maintained comparatively a better fiscal and monetary discipline according to my understanding. Yet, during that period as well, our credit ratings were downgraded. I don't understand the reason behind this. Could you please explain the theoretical aspect of this? Since you were the governor of CBSL during that period, you definitely have a better understanding of this matter.
Okay. So, in the time I was in the CBSL, we had one downgrade. And that downgrade came about in 2018, the last quarter. when we had a change of government, do you remember there was this constitutional crisis when the government changed hands, and brother, the Yahapalana government was replaced by the SLPP. The president brought about that change, and at that time, we had an IMF program in place which helped us to bring about this monetary and fiscal stability the questioner is talking about. But that program was also suspended. So we had this political instability. The IMF program got suspended. And the rating agencies thought that things were going to go really bad. We told them, please wait till the Supreme Court gave a judgment. But they didn't wait. They downgraded us. For those reasons, really, the main reason was the suspension of the IMF program. That is the change of government unconstitutionally, and the suspension of the IMF program. With that, the rating agencies downgraded us. Despite our attempts to tell them, wait till the Supreme Court gave the judgment. The Supreme Court, of course, gave a judgment, and the Yahapalana government was restored. But by that time, the downgrade had taken place. So what's important is not only economic policies, but also you must have, political stability as well. Hello? Damini, have I lost you?
No, doctor. No, doctor. And doctor, there are several other questions in the chat box. I'm also thinking about the time. Actually, we are running out of the time also.
Okay. I'm
But
easy. I'm in your hands. I'm in your hands. I've set aside the afternoon.
Yes, doctor. So there is a doctor. It's not a question, but some kind of idea that Mr. S.R. Fernando has shared. So he has mentioned in this comment, we should focus on hard pegging our currency than focusing on multiple anchors, countries such as Singapore, Hong Kong.
And maybe some of the oil producers.
Yes. Wait, doctor.
Okay.
This is the question. This is the comment, doctor. We should focus on hard pegging our currency than focusing on multiple anchors. Countries such as Singapore, Hong Kong, Dubai focus on hard pegging to USD and have been very successful over the years. Our central bank has focused on multiple anchors and have always failed.
Okay, fine. So, two things. One is, why don't we hard peg? And the other is, do we have a multiple anchor? Those are the two questions. No. So now, if you hard peg the currency, you have to have a very strong balance of payments, right? Because for the exchange rate to be stable, to be anchored to, say, the US dollar, in the old days it used to be gold, but now the US dollar, you have to be able to run current surpluses in the current account of your balance of payments consistently, so that you have the reserves to be able to maintain that rate. And also you need to have stable macroeconomic policies that don't upset the peg too much by creating too much pressure on the deficit side of the balance of payments. In our case, we keep getting these large deficits in the current account of the balance of payments, which makes it very difficult to maintain a stable peg. Countries like Hong Kong and countries like Singapore have very large current account surpluses in their economies. Now, for us to suddenly get current account surpluses, we will have to squeeze imports and squeeze growth. Like we got a current account surplus last year because we squeezed growth so low. But now you will see as soon as growth starts picking up, our current account will go into deficit. So to get a surplus, we have to develop this production economy that some of our colleagues today have been speaking about. But right now, our economy just isn't strong enough. Our current account is not strong enough. Current account of the balance payments is not strong enough to run a hard peg. Then in terms of multiple anchors, we are now no longer with this flexible inflation targeting regime. The anchor is basically the inflation target now. And the exchange rate is managed flexibly to be the first line of defense against any kind of external shocks. So we have a single, no multiple anchor, one single anchor, and that is the rate of inflation. So policy is set to hit that inflation target. So we know, we can't say we have a multiple anchors now. We just have a single anchor under this regime, this flexible inflation targeting regime. So we have a single anchor inflation, and our current account is just not strong enough at the moment to have a hard peg. And if we are to create current account surpluses at the present time, we would have to squeeze imports in the way we did last year, where growth becomes very, very low. And the implications are hardship for the people. So without intense hardship for the people, it is difficult for us to go to a hard peg at this time until, of course, if our economy improves and we start running large current account surpluses, then we can go for a hard surplus like Singapore or Hong Kong. Am I clear? Is that clear?
Yes, doctor.
Okay.
Doctor, we have another question, but with the time constraint, I think we have to conclude the session also.
Okay.
I don't know whether it's okay for me to ask these questions because some of our members have sent these questions to my WhatsApp saying they have technical errors and signal losses. So if we can answer this question with a quick response, doctor.
Okay.
The question is, what lessons can Sri Lanka learn from other countries that have successfully navigated through similar economic crises?
Okay. So the country which has done it most recently is Greece. But I must say that there is one big difference between Greece and ourselves, because Greece is also a member of the European Union and they get support from the European Union as well as the IMF. So they have an advantageous position. But the causes of their crisis was very similar to ours. They had poor fiscal discipline, poor productivity, and only one or two sectors where they were competitive, and that was tourism and shipping. And very large public sector, highly, like us, they didn't work very much. So very similar characteristics in the two economies. And they took on a lot of debt and had a debt crisis and had a very severe depression, recession, about now 15 years ago, is it, or 10 years ago? I can't remember now. It was very, very bad. They had an IMF program, severe austerity. Then they had a government which was right of center. They got rid of it and brought a left-wing government. That government tried alternate strategies and things got worse. Then this is something we can learn and see when they tried alternate strategies to overcome the problem, what happened. And why did they give it up? The left-wing government gave up the policies and actually moved back to the original, more centrist policies. Then they started to make an improvement. Then they got a right of center government. And now they are the best performing economy in Europe. Greece is the big, but they followed orthodox policies, which is what we are doing now. But we have to persist like they did to get to where they are now. So we have to, it took them 10 years.
Okay, Doctor, thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, are there any questions from anyone? So, okay, I guess the questions are over. So that brings us to the end of this session today. And Doctor, thank you very much for your insightful presentation and taking your precious time and just to engage with us more than 2 hours today. Actually, not every day we get this kind of opportunities to hear from experts like you. So for us, for our members, I believe this is a great opportunity for them. Obviously, this session, I think everyone's perspectives might be broadened on economic aspects. So thank you very much, Doctor, again, for choosing to educate us on these very abstract economic concepts. And also, I would like to thank everyone for your participation, involvement, and engagement. And we heard some amazing questions, and also that helped a lot to get more from our doctor. So I believe like doctor might also understood through this session like how interactive these young individuals are, and they are from across the country, doctor, from Polonnaruwa, from Ampara, and like very rural areas. I also wanted to draw your attention to this enthusiasm among young individuals of our country to get themselves educated on these concepts now. Not like in earlier days. Now they are very, very active, very engaging, and they want to learn something. They want to build up their own perception, opinion, having their minds open to different perspectives. Even as liberal youth movement, we don't want to burden them with some ideology. We always tell them and recommend them and encourage them to read, listen, and be open to perspectives and ideas and build up your own ideology, build up your own opinion regarding everything. So you don't have to get other people's agendas and work accordingly. You can have your own agenda. So that is our message to our members. And also, Doctor, we have another request. So since you saw this enthusiasm and engagement, we believe that you will also support us in future events as well. Or to engage with another session like this, because there were so many other questions and my WhatsApp also filled with questions. I don't think we have time to get answers for that questions. Anyway, thank you, Doctor, again, and thank you, dear participants and members. And also, there is a feedback form in the chat box. I think many of you have filled that form. If you have not filled that form yet, please fill it and send it to us, because that will be very, very helpful for us in designing future Zoom sessions with you all. And also, links to our all socials are mentioned in the chat box. Like and follow our social media platforms, so you can update. You can get update yourselves about our upcoming events, workshops, Zoom sessions, and other physical sessions and other events. And again, thank you very much, everyone, for your kind participation. See you soon in our next Zoom session.
Namini, may I just say one word to thank
Yes,
you?
Doctor.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And I must say, I found this a very uplifting session, particularly because, as you said, this engagement. I'm sorry I spoke too long at the beginning, but next time we'll have more time for the Q&A and less time for me to talk. But what my generation has failed the country. There's no doubt about it. We have to take responsibility and say that we have not done well. And we have, I'm 74 now. I was born just after independence, and we have not done a good job. We've done a bad job. But I'm encouraged by your generation. They, as you say, they seem to be different. They seem to want to learn. They seem to have a more open mind. So I am encouraged, at the end of my life, it's very encouraging that the younger generation, your movement, Next Gen Sri Lanka, such groups are getting more and more engaged, because I think the country will get to a very different place very soon once you all take charge. I hope that will come sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. So good night, everyone.
Good night, Namini. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, sir.
Good night.
Thank you very much, sir. Good night.
Good night.